I know it's a long evening for you, and this is the fourth talk. And we haven't had much questions or discussion, so it's a long evening, so I'm just empathising with you with that. Margaret Barker's talk. Margaret's computer crashed this morning, so Raphael is going to be giving her talk, and also the moderator couldn't be here, so I'm going to introduce Margaret. Margaret Barker is one of the most prominent biblical theologians of the time. She is a Methodist preacher. She developed a theology called temple theology, looking very much back into the ancient origins of Christianity, called temple theology. Margaret is one of the most extraordinary people that you'll ever meet. She's written 19 books on the subject from the mid-80s to now. Can you follow what I'm saying? And some of her books are absolutely classic in the field. She wrote books in the 90s called The Gate of Heaven, The Great Angel, The Great High Priest, another book called Temple Theology, Temple Mysticism, and she's been publishing now for 30 or 35 years. She was invited to speak here because in 1997 she was invited to be part of a symposium called Religion, Science and the Environment by the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople, the Orthodox Patriarch. And this very much led her to develop the practical implications of spirituality and temple theology as a basis for understanding the environment and the theology of the environment. So what you're going to see tonight, and what Raphael is kindly going to read her talk, and there are going to be clips of a few films. There was a documentary that was made called The Meeting of the Waters, which broadcasts the encounter and dialogue between leaders of indigenous spirituality from the Amazon and leaders of the Orthodox and the Catholic traditions. So this part of this documentary is going to be shown tonight, and this is what the talk is about. And the documentary in the talk is discussing the importance of a global community that cultivates and exalts dialogue between different spiritualities, cultural otherness, differences and plurality. And what more wonderful place in the world could this possibly happen but in Brazil? Brazil is the center of this dialogue and conversation. So over to Raphael now.
Então eu vou fazer a fala em inglês e basicamente eu vou ler o roteiro que a Margaret me passou. Essa é a Margaret, só para vocês terem uma imagem dela, né? E ela pediu para que a gente começasse com a imagem desse ícone. Então, na primeira parte da minha fala, a gente vai ter essa imagem desse ícone como referência. We are about to watch a film about an event that took place in Brazil 17 years ago, in July 2006. It was very much an experiment, but seeds were sown during those days that grew and flourished and bore unexpected fruit. The original event in 2006 was a waterborne symposium convened by His All Holiness, the Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew, who is the spiritual leader of the Orthodox Church. He is, so to speak, their Pope. He had become known as the Green Patriarch because of his commitment to the care of creation and making people aware of the effects of so many modern lifestyles. The waters of the earth were polluted, and many species faced extinction. The harmony and balance of creation had been lost. The symposium was based in Manaus. We lived on boats as we traveled. We saw something of the rivers and of the forest. The symposium comprised scientists, economists, politicians, and journalists, so necessary to take the message to the world. Above all, there were the religious leaders, Roman Catholic, Protestant, and Orthodox, but most important, and for the first time in such a gathering, the leaders of the people of the forest. The icon which you see was given to the cathedral in Manaus to work the visit of the symposium. I shall say more about the icon in a moment. The film we are going to watch was made 2 years ago, that is, 15 years after the original event. It was to reflect on the results of the symposium, which had been a unique meeting of minds and cultures. In the film, you will have a brief glimpse of the icon which was present at the ceremony of the blessings of the waters. Religious leaders of Brazil's old and new faiths met where the Rio Negro with its dark waters and the Rio Solimões with its yellow waters meet. The waters do not mingle at first, but stay separate side by side for about 6 kilometers. Then they join together to form the mighty Amazon. The place is called the Meeting of the Waters. This is also the title of the film, which shows how two distinct ways of thinking met, came alongside each other, and as they eventually mingled, they learned from each other. The words spoken and the setting in which they were spoken were equally part of the message. Most important of all were the many symbols that were used to illustrate and to represent the concerns of the symposium. Jung said in the Red Book, "The wealth of the soul exists in images, and that if a person does not find that wealth of images, the horror of emptiness will overcome him." This evening, I shall tell you about the images that were hidden, the hidden structure of the symposium, images that helped us grasp how and why the glorious Amazon forest was becoming a wasteland of dust and hardship. The images will all be familiar to you. Let us begin with the waters. In Jewish and Christian tradition, waters represent life and heavenly knowledge. By heavenly knowledge, I mean the God-given knowledge that upholds the creation and human society and maintains them in harmony. It is usually called wisdom. Where there is no water, that is, where there is no wisdom, there is no life. That same tradition also knows of another form of knowledge, the knowledge that can lead to good or evil. This knowledge was poisoned or polluted water, and it destroyed life. The conflict between the two, between wisdom and the knowledge of good and evil, is set out in the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. There were 2 trees there, one intended as their food, the other one forbidden. They chose to eat from the wrong tree. The human pair were deceived by Satan and chose the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that leads to destruction. As a result, they lost their beautiful Garden of Eden and lived in a wasteland of dust and hardship. Satan's words made the forbidden tree seem attractive, even better than the tree of life. But in reality, they lost their place in Eden, and they lost the water that brought life to the land. Here, water has both its meanings. They lost the water literally, and they also lost the wisdom to uphold harmony in the creation and human society. In Solomon's temple, some 3,000 years ago, there was a heavenly mother as well as a heavenly father. Over the centuries, many neglected the heavenly mother, and so few people today know about her. Just as God the Father was honored with many titles, she also had many names. She was the Virgin Mother of the Messiah, and she was also wisdom, the giver of water in both its senses. Christians remembered her as the Holy Spirit. The Jewish and Christian prophets such as Ezekiel, Zechariah, and St. John had visions of the Eden restored, and always they saw the waters flowing again. What they predicted was a time when the Heavenly Mother and her wisdom would be restored. Jesus ben Sira was a Jewish philosopher who lived in Jerusalem about 200 years before Jesus. He recorded a poem in which the wisdom told of her longing to return and water her garden. The poem is, "I will water my orchard and drench my garden. I will again make instruction shine forth like the morning light. I will make it shine afar. I will pour our teaching like prophecy and leave it to future generations." The first Christians honored Mary, the mother of Jesus, with titles given to the Heavenly Mother of the Messiah, and so Mary too was called Wisdom. The film shows what happened when the knowledge of good and evil was brought in the rainforest. Conquest and commerce replaced the indigenous wisdom, the forest was destroyed, and the soil was left as dust. 1 year before the original symposium, in his inaugural address on 24th April 2005, Pope Benedict had used the same image of the desert. He echoed, but did not actually mention, Jung's words about the overwhelming horror of emptiness. The external deserts in the world are growing because the internal deserts have become so vast. Therefore, the earth's treasures no longer serve to build God's garden for all to live in, but they have made to serve the powers of exploitation and destruction. The lust for treasures of the earth has poisoned many waters and corrupted many human minds. Illegal gold mining, for example, which was prominent in last month's meeting in Belém. It has caused great suffering in the Amazon basin. The workers live in terrible conditions, the land is wounded and destroyed, and the rivers are poisoned by the mercury used by the miners. The mercury builds up in the fish that people eat, and so even a mother's milk poisons her baby. This is the genocide for the Yanomami people and many others. And look at the images: a mother offering poisoned milk, rivers bringing death, not life. The Bible describes this. The profit from wisdom is better than gold, is one of the proverbs of King Solomon. The evil serpent's reign of terror was described in the book of Revelation. He forced people to wear his mark. Hollywood filmmakers call it the mark of the beast. In his mother tongue, Hebrew, St. John knew that the mark was literally a snake bite, and that word sounds the same as interest on money. In the icon, the Virgin Mary and her son Jesus are sat in a fountain. This does not depict anything in the gospel stories about Jesus and his mother. It is said to represent a fountain in Old Constantinople, now called Istanbul, which had a picture of Mary and Jesus behind it. The importance of the icon is what it symbolizes. People who came to the fountain were reminded, as they drew their water, that all water came from Mary, remembered as wisdom. The Greek title of the icon is Zoudokos Page. Sorry for the pronunciation. Zoudokos means container of life, and Pegi means fountain. Wisdom is the source of water in both senses. The everyday necessity that sustains all life, and the knowledge of how to live in harmony with the creation that sustains all life. We therefore have two universally recognized symbols in the icon: the Heavenly Mother and her gift of water and wisdom. And in the present situation, there are mothers suckling with poisoned milk, poisoned rivers, and poisoned knowledge. The icon was given as a gift to Manaus to mark the coming together of two ancient wisdoms at the point where the two rivers meet. The fountain of wisdom in the icon flows out in two streams, and people drink from both. We shall now watch the film made by members of the 2006 symposium, reflecting on their experiences and on some of the seeds sown that took root and bore unexpected fruit. Watch for the recognition that Western values were destroying the forest, that the developers of Western science had provided the means to do things differently, but chose not to. This is the knowledge of good and evil that replaced wisdom and then turned Eden into dust. And watch for Pope Francis before he came Pope. After the film, I will tell you about another symbol of wisdom that speaks without words, and then we shall watch another short film. The second film has no words. Its images and symbols speak for themselves.
No início do século XXI, algo inesperado aconteceu na consciência humana. Com o futuro do planeta em xeque, as pessoas no mundo rico entenderam que podiam aprender com os indígenas. Para alguns, isso foi um modismo, para outros, uma mudança real de opinião. As pessoas começaram a prestar atenção às falas e escritos de sábios indígenas. As Nações Unidas reconheceram formalmente os direitos dos indígenas. As pessoas entenderam que não podem proteger os lugares mais frágeis do mundo se não protegerem e respeitarem os guardiões desses lugares. Em 2006, houve um marco na relação entre cristianismo formal e os povos indígenas. Uma reunião de cientistas ambientais, líderes religiosos e membros da comunidade ocorreu em Manaus por iniciativa do patriarca Bartolomeu, líder da Igreja Ortodoxa. Esta foi uma série de viagens que o patriarca fez em lugares ecologicamente sensíveis, como a Groenlândia e Nova Orleans. Em todos esses lugares, o patriarca enfatizou que estava vindo com humildade como convidado. Não representava nenhum poder colonial. Ele se criou em uma ilha turca, numa pequena comunidade cristã grega. De um certo modo, ele também pertence a um povo antigo com raízes profundas na terra e na água. A convite dos povos indígenas, ele abençoou as águas no próprio ponto onde os dois rios convergem para formar o Amazonas. Os bispos anglicanos e católicos se postaram atrás dele enquanto oficiava a cerimônia antiga que recorda o batismo de Jesus Cristo. Os povos indígenas abençoaram e acolheram seus convidados cristãos e realizaram sua própria cerimônia para santificar as águas. Não houve mistura de religiões, mas uma espécie de respeito mútuo pela integridade uma da outra. Para cada pessoa que participou desse encontro na Amazônia, cientistas e políticos brasileiros, o clero do Brasil, ambientalistas ingleses, líderes religiosos da Turquia e da Grécia, foi um momento de mudança.
Bem, primeiro foi um encontro carregado de muito simbolismo, porque nós estávamos na Amazônia com uma congregação de diferentes olhares para o que estava acontecendo naquele momento no mundo, particularmente na Amazônia, suportado pela sabedoria milenar dos povos indígenas, que também se faziam presentes, e numa perspectiva de diálogo interreligioso que foi profundamente marcante. Uma outra coisa importante era juntando ali como se fossem pequenas pedras não lavradas de possibilidades de futuros, de inspirações que poderiam advir da sabedoria dos povos que sabem como conviver com a natureza, e a presença do patriarca Bartolomeu fez com que aquele momento parecesse uma possibilidade real. Depois de tanta história vivida, de tantas lições aprendidas, de tudo aquilo que não edifica do ponto de vista da perspectiva dos projetos de Deus para a sua criação e para aqueles que ele criou como mordomos dessa criação.
My name is Edilberto Francisco Moura Sena. I am a Brazilian from the state of Pará in Amazonia. I am 79 years old, a retired pastor, but a living priest. I was so surprised because it was a big meeting, big convention, 300 people, I think, journalists, scientists, including Vandana Shiva with the patriarch. And we walked in the field. I took some seeds, said, Reverend, take some seeds in your hands and bring with you to your table to remember what's the disgrace that is happening here in Amazonia. And he was very grateful to that patriarch, that is my friend also, and then I give an abraço to him.
It was the first time I'd been at a high-level event where the indigenous were centre stage. A more intimate gathering in the heart of the forest, on the confluence of the river, and where great minds converged And there was a cross-pollination of ideas, discoveries that created a spark, and the level of the debate was extraordinary, forever flowing for 7 days and 7 nights, not just in the podium, but in the corridors and the canteens. And I remember you could be sitting at breakfast with a bishop or a botanist extolling the virtues of the Brazil nut, or at supper with a shaman or a scientist.
O símbolo do encontro amazônico foi ícone da Virgem Maria, representado como uma fonte de água. Margaret Barker, especialista mundialmente famosa em textos e imagens religiosos, explica.
Of course, it's a very old icon type, and it's a particular favourite of the patriarch, and originated in just north of Istanbul, Constantinople. There's a very special spring that was holy and so forth. So it's a much loved icon style, but the origin of the idea goes way back to the beginning of the biblical story of the Garden of Eden, where you have the rivers coming out of paradise, water comes, and then the rivers divide into 4 and they go out and they water the earth and they water all human society. And here you've got the lovely picture of Mary presiding as almost like a guardian over those waters, because throughout the biblical tradition, Old Testament and New Testament, water is a symbol of knowledge. And so where water, pure water, flows freely, then the creation is irrigated and human society is nurtured. And all the time you look at that image and you say this also applies to knowledge and how we use our knowledge. Are we using this to irrigate the creation and to irrigate and nourish human society, or are we using it to pollute and to destroy?
Hilton Phillipson veio para o Brasil em 1982 como banqueiro. Isso o levou a profundo envolvimento com a Amazônia e dos seus povos indígenas. Agora, ele dirige uma fazenda na Inglaterra sobre os princípios orgânicos que aprendeu com os indígenas.
There are a couple of really important things that stand out for me from the Amazon Symposium. The first of all was witnessing forgiveness coming from the indigenous people to us, to the whole body, effectively, of the Christian church, coming to the Amazon to listen, not to conquer this time. But if you think that those people have been on the receiving end of effectively genocide from the white man for 5 centuries, and they have nothing to celebrate whatsoever about what we call the discovery of Brazil in 1500, they suffered about a 90% population loss in the centuries following. But to see the indigenous leaders actually on that platform at the meeting of the waters, the Encontros de Almas, blessing all of us, including the Patriarch, including Catholic cardinals, including evangelical bishops, the Bishop of Liverpool, so on. I thought that was immensely moving from whether it's a Christian perspective or any perspective, just that power of forgiveness, because boy, they have got a lot of suffering to forgive. The other thing which came to me so powerfully was the difference in the worldview of indigenous people and the rest of us there in the symposium in terms of the time frames in which we consider things. I mean, our world is driven by the accumulation of consumer goods. Companies are judged by their quarterly earnings, their annual reports. Our political systems are driven by electoral cycles which may be 4, 5 or maybe 6 years at the most. Very few politicians have the ability to look beyond that. And yet the indigenous people get together, they consult, and they consider the consequences of their actions to the tune of 6 generations to come. You know, it does feel like we were a happy band of brothers, and of course sisters, floating down those rivers. Absolutely extraordinary. And that, of course, you know, takes me immediately to Antonio, and I wonder how he's doing, because we formed a particularly close bond. So, oi, Antonio, como você vai?
It was amazing, amazing, because I saw, among many things, I saw the native, the Indians, blessing the church representatives, the cardinals that were there. And imagine, the cardinals were behind, or the church was behind the massacre that the Europeans promoted when they colonized America. And now you see this forgiveness, this greatness of spirit from the Indians to bless them. And it was mutual.
Antônio Donato Nobre é cientista, com uma vida inteira de pesquisas mostrando como a floresta afeta nosso clima. Sua própria herança é em parte europeia, em parte indígena. Na época da reunião amazônica, ele estava iniciando diálogo profundo com pensadores indígenas como Davi Kopenawa e mais tarde Ailton Krenak.
The Indian wisdom was very powerful, because I hear wise native people who have managed, in spite of the massacre, in spite of the colonization, 500 years of persecution and genocide, they managed to cling to their ancestral knowledge. And they have an understanding of complexity which far surpasses even the most sophisticated science we have. Davi Kopenawa, Yanomami, surmised everything I had known to that point on the connection between forest and rainfall and the climate. In this statement, he said, doesn't the white man know that if he chopped the trees, if he cut down the forest, there won't be any rain? And if there is no rain, he will have nothing to drink from or to eat. And just that, very simple, like mathematics. I started almost crying. Actually, I cried because I realized that 20 years using flux towers, supercomputers, boats, airplanes, we got to the same conclusion that the native there had without any of those instruments. He had it, he knew it. How did he know it? He said, we always knew this since ancestral times. So anytime I discuss, for example, with someone like Ailton Krenak, I feel like gifted by them because I put something from the scientific perspective, and then they come with the native knowledge, which is tried and true for thousands of years, and then I am in silence. My intellect goes into silence. And I realize something as well, that from their knowledge comes a peace, or a sense of fulfillment.
O debate com pensadores indígenas ajudou Antônio Nobre a desenvolver uma crítica da ciência ocidental, bem como da religião ocidental.
Science was basically born out of horror, not love. Why? Because if you professed a free mind, you could end up in an Inquisition tribunal. Western civilization was born from this trauma. And on the scientific side, knowledge produced many wonderful things. But it's amazing to see, 5 centuries later, that a little bit, or maybe a lot, of what gave birth to science, which was persecution and intolerance to different knowledge, is contaminating many realms of the scientific inquiry today.
Antônio Nobre tinha a sensação de que ideias indígenas meio perdidas poderiam ajudar a curar a brecha sangrenta entre a ciência e o espiritual. A teoria de Gaia, sustentando que todas as coisas vivas interagem com a Terra, não é surpresa para os indígenas, como descobriu Nobre.
They could have enlightened our biological colleagues 30, 40 years ago that Gaia is the Mother Earth. That is absolutely so evident to them. They know it because they talk with the spirits. And now scientists had to wait until we are almost killing Gaia to admit that Gaia is indeed a being, the planet's alive. This was incredibly difficult for many, many scientists, geoscientists and biologists, to say that planet Earth is alive. Very difficult. Not difficult for a native speaker, like David Copenau or Ailton Krenak. Not difficult. Not difficult to Antonio, no longer difficult. We are maybe able to put a brake in this brain that totally lost control, put a brake in this crash. And we know how to do this. Science knows how to do this. The Indians know how to do this. Religious people can know, if they are open, how to do this. Learn with the Indians, learn with science, and mutually. And for all this to happen, we need to develop humbleness. We have to bring love, caring, and perception and understanding of the collective into bearing now. Otherwise, we are utterly lost.
Oi, Antônio.
Oi, Bruce. Oi, tudo bem? Como é que você está? Onde você está agora? Eu estou aqui em São Paulo, perto de São Paulo, em São José dos Campos. Você está onde?
Bom dia. Tudo bem? Tudo bem comigo.
Antônio, é inspirador olhar para trás e ver como isso mudou nossa vida. E ainda está mudando a nossa vida. Antônio, você está de um lado do Atlântico que eu do outro. Eu estou aqui na ponta noroeste da Irlanda, um lugar onde a cultura e a língua indígenas da Irlanda sobreviveram por milagre. Quero te apresentar a um amigo meu, que é um dos músicos mais conhecidos da Irlanda. Ele lhe dirá onde estamos e ele tem uma história incrível para contar. Como sua vida como músico foi transformada por sua amizade com os povos aborígenes da Austrália.
Columkill was a saint in the 500s, he lived. He straddled the world of the Druids and the Christians. He was at the cusp of the point where the Druidic culture was passing on into the Christian culture. And I feel very comfortable living in this area because you feel his spirit is around and blessing the area and blessing us all, keeping us on the straight and narrow. I went out to an Aboriginal settlement and went to an elder there and asked to be taught the didgeridoo, and it was an amazing process by which he implanted the knowledge of how to play in my brain without saying it in words. Suddenly I was playing in a traditional rhythm, he was clapping, he was singing, and he'd managed to impart the knowledge to me in a way that bypassed my mental brain. It's almost as if it's some kind of mind-altering substance that takes you see the world in a different way. You begin to notice plants and animals and rocks and trees. Everything has a beautiful natural familiarity. Every part of nature is intertwined in a way. Everything relates to everything else. And the Aboriginal system recognizes that. And I don't think the Western system does. And so you go from a Western world into the Aboriginal world. All of a sudden, you know, the colors are brighter, you feel the spirit in things, everything seems natural and fantastic. And then when you go back and you leave the Aboriginal culture and you go back to a Western setting, all of a sudden, like, the shops and the cars seem strange and alien.
Veja, Antônio, há muitas coisas aqui na Irlanda que eu entendo melhor porque estive no Brasil e conheci pessoas como você. Agora, vamos falar um pouco sobre aquele nosso encontro no Amazonas. Antônio, você teve um diálogo público espetacular com um dos mais influentes pensadores cristãos, João Metropolita de Pérgamo. Você disse que a ciência deve se autocriticar. Ele disse que a religião deve se autocriticar. Em um discurso, ele disse algumas coisas incríveis, e mesmo agora, aos 90 anos, ele ainda está dizendo essas coisas. Primeiro, ele disse que no início dos séculos cristãos, os padres da igreja grega acreditavam fortemente na importância do corpo humano e do mundo material. Eles tiveram que lutar contra os seguidores de Platão, que preferiam o abstrato e o invisível.
So, by confessing the resurrection of the body in the creed, the church took an ecological position, saying that we must respect the body and the material world.
Em segundo lugar, nos últimos 500 anos, a mente humana tomou um rumo desastroso, imaginando-se completamente fora do reino animal e do mundo natural.
A technology with which we live today was in the first phase after the Industrial Revolution consisted in abstracting energy from nature, which energy then would be used for purposes which nature itself did not have.
Terceiro, quem pode nos ajudar a superar esse problema? Os indígenas.
The indigenous people are attached to their land, and they're not only attached themselves to their land, but they're attached with their ancestors in their land. And the ancestors are always for them present in their land. An offense against the land and the environment as it is being inherited is an offense against the ancestors. And the ancestors are always, for them, they're present in their everyday life. The other thing is that they preserved something that we lack, and that is, I would call it, the myth, the ability, the element of myth. Myth manages to unite time and space. With the myth, you use a language that refers to the past, but in a way that brings with it also the present.
Agora, vamos nos perguntar o que aconteceu com os bispos católicos que estavam ao lado do patriarca quando ele abençoou as águas. Uma história incrível também. Em 2007, um ano depois de nosso encontro, houve uma reunião de bispos católicos de todas as partes da América do Sul. Em Aparecida, como você sabe, um santuário da Virgem Maria no Brasil. E foram os bispos brasileiros que disseram: devemos proteger a floresta e os povos da floresta. Havia um cadel da Argentina que achou isso muito estranho, mas ele refletiu e depois concordou. Seu nome era Cardeal Jorge Bergoglio, que agora conhecemos por um nome diferente. Uma jornalista da Argentina que acompanhava suas viagens há muitos anos.
Latin America is arguably the region of the world he's come back the most to, and every single trip he made the point of visiting indigenous people. We saw it when he went to Puerto Maldonado in Peru. We saw it when he went to the southern region of Mexico. We saw it in Ecuador. We saw it in Bolivia, where he had this very important meeting with both the indigenous people and the popular movement. And he gave arguably one of the biggest speeches of his pontificate, in which, among other things, he apologized for the wrongdoings of the Catholic Church and, more broadly of the Spanish Inquisition.
Em 2015, com o metropolita João ao seu lado, o Papa Francisco lançou sua encíclica verde Laudato Si. Você leu? É um texto bonito. Então, em 2019, houve outro marco. O Papa convidou bispos, homens e mulheres de ordens religiosas e pessoas comuns de 9 países amazônicos para um sínodo em Roma. 9 mulheres indígenas foram a Roma para participar com os bispos e padres. Como você vê, Antônio, as coisas percorreram um longo caminho desde que nos conhecemos. Antônio, para encerrar a conversa, gostaria de reapresentá-lo a uma velha amiga. Uma pessoa que conhecemos na Groenlândia quando você e eu viajamos com o patriarca em 2007. Você se lembra dela? O nome dela é Aleqa Hammond, a ex-primeira-ministra da Groenlândia. Ela é uma inuit orgulhosa e anticolonialista. Acredita no papel único que os povos indígenas têm que desempenhar para salvar o planeta. Mas ela também se considera uma cristã e ela tem lembranças muito boas da visita do patriarca.
I think this time of our history as indigenous people, especially the people of the Arctic, it is a very, very important time. A very important time not only because of our lands and ice and livelihood is changing, but also because it's the time where the people of the Greenlanders are uprising politically. Indeed, the indigenous peoples of the Arctic, especially the Greenlanders, we have lived more than 4,500 years in this region, a place where many other cultures have never managed to survive it because of its harshness and because of the dangers and because of the cold in many ways. But we managed this, and we have undergone several climate changes during our history. We're going to manage this one also. I personally do not think that Christianity is something bad at all. On the contrary, Christianity is a religion that Greenlanders have accepted and have adopted in our lifestyles today. And I think that these two things can go perfectly hand in hand. I have very fond and wonderful memories from the symposium in 2007 with the Patriarch. It was first time for me to meet such a charismatic person, a person that I felt that I gained a lot of love being in his presence.
O que você acha de tudo isso, Antônio? Tantas visões contraditórias.
Bruce, você falou com muitas pessoas interessantes.
Mas você sabe que todos eles têm uma coisa em comum. Todos acreditam que os povos indígenas entendem alguma coisa que nós, como pessoas do mundo rico, não entendemos. E essa coisa, esse nível de consciência, pode ser vital para a proteção da Terra. Vamos ver, Antônio, o que nossos queridos amigos de Londres têm a dizer.
I think that it won't be long before ecocide is recognised as a crime against humanity, which it obviously is, because we are harming ourselves. And if you knowingly cross boundaries, regardless of the consequences, you should suffer.
The idea that human beings can wreck the system is all built into the original description of it. The idea that human beings, by their actions, can cause incredible disaster and in the end collapse. That was known to the Hebrew prophets in the 8th century BC, so we can't say it's news.
I think that, whether you're white or black or rich or poor or old or young, Chinese, Russian, Brazilian, British, at the end of the day, we're all in the same boat, no mesmo barco.
Sim, estamos todos no mesmo barco. Talvez alguns estejam em cabine de primeira classe, outros em classe econômica. Mas se a floresta queimar e o nível do mar subir, estamos todos no mesmo barco. Meu nome é Lucas. Meus ancestrais são africanos, indígenas e europeus. Nasci no Nordeste brasileiro, não muito longe da foz do Amazonas. Não sou um cientista, não sou músico, nem tanto patriarca, mas me comove quando ouço falar de pessoas do velho mundo, com um espírito não de conquista, mas de humildade e aprendizado. Acredito que ainda há tempo para aprender novas lições. Talvez sejam lições antigas. Não sabemos. Mas a minha geração quer viver. O nosso barco navegará por muito tempo.